In our text today, we're going to take a look at what had to be one of the coolest looking events in Jesus' whole ministry, the Transfiguration. Jesus took Peter, James, and John up a high mountain by themselves to pray. And as he was praying, he was transfigured before them. His face began to shine like the sun, and his clothes became white as light. But before we get into that, I want to point out something interesting about the three that Jesus decided to bring with him. Peter, John, and his brother James are considered to be Jesus' inner circle. Of the 12 he had chosen, Jesus singles out these three, not only here, but on two other occasions. Interestingly enough, each occasion deals with death. In Luke chapter 8, Jesus takes them into Jairus' home where his daughter has died. Jesus said that she was only sleeping, and after being mocked for saying so, he said, "Arise, little girl," and raised her from the dead. Jesus showed Peter, James, and John that he had power over death. The second time, Jesus would take them into the Garden of Gethsemane in Matthew 26. He prayed, "Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done." Peter, James, and John would see that though Jesus had power over death, he was also submitted to it. And here in Matthew 17, Jesus takes the three up the mountain where they will see him glorified in death. I think that Jesus was intentional in his choice to bring these three along with him in these various encounters with death. Because if any of the disciples needed some extra instruction concerning death, it was these three. For each of them would have a very unique encounter with death themselves. Peter would be crucified upside down, a death that was prophesied by Jesus in John 21. James would be the first disciple put to death, sawed in half lengthwise by his persecutors. And John would be the last of the disciples to die. Why death? What was Jesus teaching Peter, James, and John regarding death? At the end of Matthew 16, Jesus had just finished telling all of the disciples, "If anyone desires to come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever desires to save his life will lose it. But for whoever loses his life for my sake will find it." And the last thing that he says before taking them up the mountain is, "Assuredly, I say to you, there are some standing here who shall not taste death till they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom." Obviously, Jesus couldn't have meant that some of those standing with him wouldn't die until Jesus' second coming, because all of the disciples are dead and Jesus hasn't returned yet. So what was Jesus talking about? In all of the gospel accounts, this statement can be found immediately prior to the Transfiguration. The Greek word translated transfigured is metamorpho, from where we get our word metamorphosis. The word refers to an outward change that comes from within. It's the same word we use to describe what happens to a caterpillar inside a cocoon. Jesus didn't just change the way he looked. He was changed completely into another form. The Transfiguration was a glimpse of Jesus' true glory, a special revelation of his divinity to Peter, James, and John. This was God's affirmation and confirmation of everything Jesus had done and would do thereafter. Even further confirmation came in the form of Moses and Elijah, who appeared on the mountaintop with Jesus in his glorified state. Moses and Elijah were considered the two greatest prophets in the Old Testament. Moses represented the law, or the Old Covenant. He had written the Torah and had predicted the coming of a great prophet in Deuteronomy 18. Elijah represented the prophets who had foretold the coming of the Messiah. By being present with Jesus in this moment, Moses and Elijah confirmed his messianic mission to fulfill God's law and the words of God's prophets. Finally, a bright cloud overshadowed them, and a voice came out of the cloud saying, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Hear him." Once again, the Father affirms the Son. As if there was not already enough evidence on the scene to support the truth that Jesus is the Messiah, God speaks from the sky and says it plainly. The Transfiguration revealed with certainty not only that the disciples were right in believing Jesus to be the Messiah, but that their commitment was well placed and their eternity was secure. Jesus really was God, and witnessing him in his glorified form no doubt sealed the deal in the minds of these disciples. And we can take away the same confidence. I love studies that strengthen my resolve and give me even greater clarity as to who Jesus really is. Because if Jesus really is who he claimed to be, then believing that has to have life-altering implications. And Jesus proves himself to be exactly what he claims to be, time and time again: God. Jesus is God. Therefore, we receive the same instruction that Jesus gave to his disciples. If anyone desires to come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me.